It's my pleasure to introduce Emma Kelly. Emma received her master's degree in landscape architecture with distinction from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. Emma's projects find her interacting with complex networks of design and engineering professionals, local craftsmen, and regionally sourced materials. Emma sees her role as steering a creative conversation with clients and properties to building unique landscapes that fit unique goals. Practicing primarily in Maine and focusing on residential landscapes, Emma believes deeply in the power of placemaking, the ability to shape the spaces around us into crucibles for future meaning and memories. Today, her focus will be on hardscape, so I will pass it over to Emma.
First off, is there a flicker? Is it just in my eye? Is it okay with everybody, or
there is a slight flicker? It should stop.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure nobody was going to be.
We can switch to the TV.
I'm not looking at it, so as long as you guys are okay, you're okay.
It's not happening.
Good. Yes, I'm going to start with some boring gray slides first, but we'll get to some good stuff after if you just put up with it. So, first things first, I wanted to start with an introduction of myself. My love of landscapes started in my grandmother's garden, crawling around as a baby while she would weed, and sort of checking in and chewing on things that looked interesting. But I didn't know that this was a thing you could do until much later in my life. And it's been a joy ever since I sort of figured that out. Nowadays, I have a small landscape design practice. It's in Portland, and I'm focused mostly on residential and small institutional, as Blake said, and mostly in Maine. But I love what I do for all those reasons that Blake was describing. And for me, it's about connection and connecting people to place. So Maine is the right place to do that. I'll also say not a subject that I'm here to talk to you about today, but I'm also part of a collaborating laboratory of 6 women-owned solo and small offices throughout the Northeast. We're called CoLab. We're working to create alternative structures every day to normative office practices, which if you've worked in a design office, I don't need to tell you more. And we're working to integrate being sort of whole humans into our professional lives. I've done # working moms can find support, if not balance. What I love about landscape is everything. What I love about the practice of landscape, though, as I was saying, is its relationships. The relationships that I get to build with clients, with places, with colleagues, and with craftspeople. Now, with that said, I will admit that I'm not focusing as much on my work today. You saw much of Todd's gorgeous work and David's gorgeous stuff. I have a little bit in here, but today I'm looking wider at some inspiration and some pragmatism. But if you have questions about my work as well, glad to answer them. All right, so if that's me, I'm going to be hokey for a second. And I'd love you to turn to a person near you that you might not know. Or you can pretend not to know them if you know everybody. Or if you're joining us at home, you can turn to your partner or your pet. And this is the time I should say, hi, Mom and Dad. I think you're registered. I'd love you to share your name and share a description of a garden space that you love to visit or work in. I'm asking you to do this because I appreciate that these introductions are what make us each other's best resources and seed sharers. So please take a minute. I can see that you guys love your gardens. What? I know, right? I fed the monster. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. All right. Well, why don't I just say that I hope that these introductions, clearly they're opening up some great conversation, that I hope you linger and have some coffee and talk about some more, and maybe even see each other in each other's gardens sometime soon. That was so great. I love that. Okay. All right. I also wanted to start with thanks to Allison, and to Julia and Blake, and your whole club for inviting me to talk with you today as part of your Winter Green Dreaming series. That's the way I'm thinking of it. And thanks for putting up for a lecture about the not green stuff in your gardens. You're very forbearing to come. You've had such a great setup so far, as I said, with Todd talking about the elements of design and inspiration from David Culp. And after you put up with me today, I see that you have on your agenda Sharon Turner diving into specifics of choosing the right plants. And then you get to hear from my hero, Irene Brady Barber, who is just so great talking about the organic process of design. So for today, though, we're going to focus on ways that hardscape elements can add structure and character to your gardens, and how they can define the shape, flow, and style of the special places that we make. All right, so we're going to talk about some really great tools that help make our gardens both functional and beautiful. And those things are going to be hardscapes, structures, and amenities. Those three categories of things. I'll explain how they differ. My hope is that I'm going to immerse you in some inspiration for style and character. And then present you with some different ways to think about structure and spaces in your own gardens that I hope go beyond the expected. Okay. Another great one. I want to start by giving you insight into how I think about design. Good luck in my brain. And a series of questions that are at the heart of my design making process, and use them as you will. So when I start thinking about design, I start from the idea of a concept, really. What's the big idea about this place that we're making? And the truth is, while I start with that question, I often start ruminating on it, and then I put it aside until I answer all the other ones, and then I come back to it, right? Because to answer what's the big idea, I need to also answer what's the structure, right? And this is about thinking about the physical shaping of a space. Am I in this design carving out a place within a pre-existing context? Am I manipulating a larger site in ways that create a new experience entirely? What sorts of things do I need to do to define the space? Things I need to do to give you access so you can actually be in the space, to give you a place to rest, to create a sense of enclosure, all those sorts of things. Those are structural questions for me. Then program. Program is really function. What do you want to do? What do you want to have happen? And this is about asking questions, really, what is going to happen here? Is this going to be a place that you gather, a place that people want to play, a place that someone wants to work, somewhere to celebrate, somewhere to reflect, somewhere to grieve? All of these things are, real pieces of program that you can design for. Circulation, so maligned, but so important. Movement is essential in design. And unless you're creating something that's only viewed like a shop window, you are inviting people in to experience your garden, I hope. And you get to think about that choreography. Do they see it all at once? Or does it unfold along a winding path? Is there a single great destination you get to, like a bench with an overlook back? Or is there a looping series of experiences that visitors move through, right? Those are all the things I think about with circulation. Character and style are sort of combined. I think sometimes they're thought of synonymously, but they're not for me. Style, for me, is about an aesthetic preference. You might prefer bright colors and contemporary shapes, while someone else prefers something muted and antique and rustic. That's style. But character is about the experience and the human experience. How do you want people to feel in the space? Not just what do you want them to do? Do you want them to feel comforted, invigorated, curious? And that all stems from the character that you imbue a place with. And so when you put this all back together, it nets, I think, the big idea or concept. And I find that having a big idea or concept is really useful. I will say this again and again. I say it to students, I say it to colleagues, I say it to everybody, because when questions come up in the course of the life of your garden, because you're always tinkering, you're always changing, you're always designing, right? If you have a strong concept to start with, you can always look back to that. And that's sort of like your social contract. So that when you're at the nursery and you're like, man, these plants look really great, you can step back and say, okay, but do these, are these my Skittles for today that I'm just excited about? Or do these have a home? Like, do these, if I get these, do I have a place? And are they going to keep building the bigger idea that I'm trying to create and the bigger feeling? So I think that it's really useful. All right. So in case you think that big ideas in your own gardens are, pretty obvious and most gardens have the same one, I am going to do a quick exercise with us all together. Okay. I want you to close your eyes. Good. Not many cheaters. And I want you to think about a vegetable garden and what that means to you. Visualize it. Okay, open them. And now I want us to look at a wide range of expression and options for vegetable gardens that flow from very specific decisions about structure, program, circulation, character, and style. Is it really even a veggie garden? I don't know. I would say yes. Common to all of these very different expressions is that the designers thought about those questions, right? And they used hardscape elements to some degree or other to bring those ideas to life in their garden, right? So with that framework in mind, my goal today is to talk about these non-vegetated elements in your gardens. Hardscape, structures, and amenities, right? I wrote them up. That said, I don't think it's especially useful for me to just run through an exhaustive list of patio materials or wall styles or fence details. Instead, I want you to do these two things. I want you to think about why you want to use any of these elements. And the questions are, do they fill a functional need? Are they going to actually make the space better, more accessible, more intelligible, more occupiable? And or are they going to give you a creative opportunity to express something that maybe needs to be oomphed and is lacking or needs more attention? All right. What is hardscape? You all are brave coming to a talk about something that even I sometimes am like, oh, that counts. So the generic term hardscape is one that we as designers tend to use for things like patios and terraces, walkways, edging, driveways, steps. Anyone else have an idea of a piece of hardscape?
Ledges.
Walls, ledges. Walls, I'll talk about a little bit in structure more. Fences, amenities, we'll get there too. Pergolas, yep, structure as well. All right, you got the umbrella. That's when I'm talking about hardscape today, I'm going to talk more about these horizontal elements, right? These flat elements. Because we do these elements of hardscape, we create with mostly horizontal materials that we're applying in the ground plane. And that the great thing about them is that they're materials you can often source and build yourself. So they're materials like aggregates and stone, brick, concrete pavers, for example, other kinds of pavers, wood and composites. And specifically though, in Maine, when we're thinking about the range of materials that we can use in this horizontal plane, my choices, and I would encourage you to think about this as well, depend on three things. When I say functional considerations, I'm asking, what is this path or terrace or space going to be used for in terms of weight? And therefore, how thick or strong do those materials have to be? Are you going to have to drive a little truck over it twice a year to dump your wood chips out? Or is this just a space that someone's going to sit on a single chair and feel the breeze in? I think about frequency of use. Is this an everyday space, or is this a space that's used once a year for an event? I think about use in different seasons. Is this something that there's going to be significant freeze thaw on, that there's a big roof runoff onto that's going to be constantly flooding it? Are you going to have to shovel it? That's always the question. Is it in a really sunny spot, and are you going to have to deal with sun bleaching, right? So those are the functional and programmatic questions I ask about materials. Then the aesthetic questions are, how is this material going to relate to the context, right? How is it going to relate to the materials of the home or the library or the school that you're building a garden in? How are you going to make that connection? What's the feel and character that you're hoping to create? Is this space going to be formal, cottage-like, contemporary, rustic? And then I also think about the surrounding landscape qualities. Am I building on the edge of some woods that I want to relate to? Am I building in a little downtown, and there's sort of an urban flair? And then, of course, this is the time to also think about your own tastes and loves. And then finally, I have put this in the last position for a reason, because I'd encourage you to develop your sense of what you'd like the hardscape element to do first before you think about its budget. But we've got to think about cost, right? It's real. So the reason, though, that I ask you to think about it last is once you think about what something needs to do in your garden, then you can think about all the different ways to make that happen, right? And each of those different ways have different costs. But if you start with the thing and the material, you're always going to end up with the same place. So if you start with, I need a stone wall, you're going to end up with a stone wall. And then it's going to be a sort of a challenge to figure out, how do I afford that stone wall? What stones do I use? All the questions that come down from that. Instead, if you look at it and you say, hey, there's a little slope that I really could use some help supporting, and I need to do something that holds it back, then maybe what ends up being is a stone wall. Maybe it's a gabion, which is a metal cage that you fill with stones. Maybe it's actually just a slope that you plant with a bunch of natives that, even though it's steep, they're going to help hold that soil better. So, thinking bigger helps us have more opportunities to be creative without closing those doors. So again, I just want to encourage you, when you're thinking about these things, think about asking yourself, I'd like to make a space that does X and feels like Y. And then look at that. You can probably achieve that via a range of solutions. All right, so instead of coming at this lecture through a lens of materials alone, I'd like to pair the elements of hardscape that I just listed with some of those materials. And I'm going to share a bunch of projects that I find inspiring and exciting to help sort of encourage your creativity as well, and see that there are beautiful options no matter what your budget or material are to use. All right, the pretty stuff. Okay, I'm going to start with the Highline Greenway in New York City. Raise of hands, anyone been here? Yay, yes, it's fabulous, right? It's one of my favorite spaces too. I think the Highline is a great project to look at because the scale of each individual space doesn't really get beyond a private garden, right? You're confronting each space and it's small and it's contained, but the linear extent of it allows so many different conditions to unfold. So hardscape. For the Highline, I want you to look at these pavers. They're really interesting. These are concrete pavers, and they're the same concrete pavers throughout the whole thing. But the difference of how they're organized and how they're finished and how they're oriented changes, and then that changes the space. And what do I mean by that? All right, so here they are. This is a section we're just trying to move people through, right? They're very placed in a linear way. They fill in between the tacks. They keep people moving. As opposed to then you come out to a space with maybe more to see in views on the outside, and the pavers twist and they die off into these planting areas. And so it's less this strong linear path, and suddenly you've introduced this sort of sinuosity and you've created these eddies of moments. I mean, look, someone's dragged a chair over there. It's begging you to stop and engage with the gardens and experience that. And that's just by sort of shifting and changing the way you use it. There's great ways to, in this example, they take out a couple pavers and they put in a grate and water comes up and slides over it and goes down and keeps coming through. And then I love this one. The paver isn't even a paver. It lifts out of the ground plane and becomes this really cool bench. Right. And then I love as well. This is also part, and there are no more pavers, but they're using wood decking in the same shape and scale and size and jointing as they use the pavers. So that this space is suddenly very different because you walk on it, it sounds different, it feels different, has a different, aura, but it's still consistent, right? So, pavers don't have to be using pavers. All right, for more familiar materials, right? I think in Maine, when we think of pads and hardscape, we often think of things like this, right? This is just a fieldstone path, something I did for a project in Kennebunkport years ago. This is the Monk's Garden at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, if anyone's been there. It's brick. It's a brick path, but man, it is the coolest brick path. And you can see, like, it's just inviting you to wander and twist, and it leads you along. And this I love. This is an old fuzzy image of Gainesway Farm in Virginia, designed by A.E. By. His work is just beautiful and poetic if you don't know it. And he's taking a native sort of limestone granite and big blocks of it, and he's using this to do something in the landscape. I don't know. Is it a path? Is it a divider? Is it a wall? Is it a piece of art? I don't know, but he's using a local material to make that happen. All right. So again, pretty standard materials, but some really creative ways to apply them. All right, wood paths. Again, I want you to think less about cost and more about intent and creativity. So I want you to look at this progression from a standard boardwalk to, I don't know if folks have been on this one. This is the Saco Heath down in Saco, Maine. It's fabulous. You should go if you haven't. But this is a boardwalk that they use the cast off ends of pallets of composite decking from local lumber shops. And so they had to take whatever colors they got, but they turned it into a gorgeous feature, right? They got all these random colors and then they made it into a celebration of something that pulls on the colors of the plants and the place, and it's just fun. And then, at the far end, I love this. This is the Tahari Courtyards in New Jersey by Muckle Falkenberg. And I think, here's wood and it's incredibly sensual, right? It's slowed down. It has these wide moss joints. It's less about sort of getting you somewhere than drawing you to have a moment and sit and spend time in a way that wood and the age that it implies really make it happen. I'm going to spend a minute talking about that most maligned of materials, but let's talk about it. May not be used ever in the scale of your own gardens, but I just want to point out that I think it's one of the most elegant and simple solutions in the landscape, asphalt is, because it just goes away. So have a look at these different conditions, right? This is the marginal way before it fell into the ocean. And this is Harvard Yard. These paths are all asphalt. And what's great about them is it recedes, right? After the first year that it's really dark, it just recedes, it silvers out. It doesn't really look like anything, but it doesn't have brick edges that are impossible to shovel. It doesn't have wood that gets mossy and slippery. It does a lot of things. And you may encounter using it in your dooryards or otherwise. It's not a bad thing. Same thing with concrete. The images I'm using are at a larger scale, but you can think about how they might apply using a really cool paver that you could find even locally. This project I wanted to show, you saw how they use concrete pavers at the High Line to such a beautiful effect. This is Levinson Plaza. It's a housing project in Boston by Mick Young Kim. And it's a small courtyard at a public housing project. And so they're using colored concrete, gray and white, that's it, or gray and black, that's it. But they're using it in these sharply defined bands, and they're weaving in these planting beds, right? And sometimes the bands pop up to become benches. And I think that a place that could be really brutal and cheap, because the budgets for these things are not great, they've embraced a material that they've used with intent, and it makes it a beautiful place. One other that I wanted to show you, let me see if I can zoom in. I can do it a little. This is the Allegheny Riverfront Park in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And this, I think, is another gorgeous use of concrete. So what you're looking at down there that people are biking on is some pretty standard concrete, big slab formed pavers. But what they did is during construction, they had to pull a lot of the reeds and grass out of the area as they were building into it. And they took that and they impressed it into the concrete, right? So they're literally making a reference to the place that's there and to the environment. They're doing something functional. It's better and non-slip. It's also just gorgeous. And so, things like that are very scalable, finding ways to create beauty from materials you have yourself. Yeah. Make it smaller again. Hey, there. There we go. Okay, good. All right. Another really popular material that we use here in Maine are aggregates, things like pea stone. Other aggregates that we use here are different kinds of gravel, or some people I've seen use crushed shells, things like that. It's very familiar, but I think you really need to pay attention to seasonal use and maintenance, right? So I can tell you from experience, snow blowing this when the ground isn't fully frozen is not a great idea next to your husband's truck. I hope you're not tuning in, Mark. That said, it can be a great material. And I'm imagining many of you have been to this place, the Astaku Azalea Gardens up in Northeast Harbor. And so their paths are a mix of pea stone and rotten rock. It's a material that's sometimes called decomposed granite. It's a mix of pea stone and stone dust. It really holds together really well. These are all materials that you can get at your local hardscape or stone yard or landscape yard, like Viking down on 90, or I love the Quonset over in Woolwich. They have everything. So these materials are accessible. And I think the great thing I hope you've experienced here with these sort of materials is that they create such a soft complement to a wide range of natural conditions. So that this path, it isn't the object. It isn't fussy. It isn't drawing your attention. It isn't distracting you. So you have to take care of where you walk. What it's doing is creating a wonderful feel underfoot and that really soft crunching sound that you hear in sort of the hush of the gardens. and it's letting everything else glow in comparison. All right, moving a little bit up. This is sort of halfway hardscape, halfway structure. Steps. I think it's easy to think about steps as just a totally functional element in your garden, something that gets you from here to there or helps you move up and down a slope. But there's also a chance to embrace steps as something sculptural and beautiful that draws attention to the garden around it. So I think these are some great examples. These are, again, some Michael van Valkenburg gardens. These are metal stairs that are just art. The support, there is support underneath them. It's hidden. They were smart about that, but they look at them. They just look like they float. And it's such a cool contrast of this really industrial material, but it's flying, right? It's something you think is usually grounded, but it's flying. And these, Jurassic Parky ferns are sort of weaving in and out and among it. And it's just a great contrast, something great to look at, as well as you can imagine walking it. Similarly, here are some steps through a garden that's all about, it's a shade garden, right? But it's all about green textures. These are types of gardens that I know we have a lot of in Maine because we love our trees and I don't want to get rid of it just to have my garden. But if you had a path that was itself really detailed, it would take away from your opportunity to appreciate all of these contrasting textures and the slight variations in the greens. So these are just pieces of stone or concrete, I can't even tell, that are set on end. And then sort of some stone dust is compacted behind them. And they just sort of step down through the landscape. Same thing, this is actually another part of that same project. Those same fronts to the steps are used and they move out into the woods. And you would say, you could just walk up that slope or you could use, some stones. There's something really beautiful about choosing to use something this simple, right? Just a piece of concrete curbing you could pick up at American Concrete, because in sort of how it dies into the slope and how it contrasts with the colors of the needles, it's calling attention to the beauty of this edge of woods that you might not have noticed otherwise, right? It's the contrast that's drawing your attention to it. All right. Here's some other steps. Big slab for a bridge, kind of cool. I'm just going to spend a moment on driveways and parking areas because a lot of the times our gardens share spaces with our dooryards, right? I don't have a ton to say here. I don't think it's especially germane, but I want to draw your attention to a few ideas and opportunities that I think are great. First, the idea that you don't need to splash out for like a crazy, busy, and expensive drive that's totally paved with granite cobbles, whatever, to elevate the experience. Instead, this is an example of just treating the apron, which is the flare where your driveway meets the road. And this is a great example. Using cobbles in this condition is such a wonderful boundary moment, right? As you come home or as visitors come to visit, they feel the bump, bump, bump. They're leaving the road and the rest of the world behind. You hear it as well. And it's a really lovely nod to sort of creating these boundaries and, a boundary that creates your internal space. At the other end of things, I want to talk about drives that aren't even drives, right? Sometimes the best drive is the one that isn't there. So this is, a traditional gravel track drive. But I just want to be really straightforward and say this is one of the hardest things to achieve in a designed garden. I've done them millions of different ways over the 20 years I've been practicing in Maine. And it's so easy to sort of get the spacing wrong for the tires, or the edges get really like cocoa pudding mushy because they're too loamy, all that sort of stuff. So I'm giving this to you quietly. I'm sharing my thing. The best bet, if you want one of these, is just create a good gravel driveway, like 1 inch minus. And then you go back, you find someone with a rock rake, and you go back and you rake through the top 4 to 6 inches, and you rake in a bunch of compost, and then you seed the whole thing. And it's a road. It's strong like a road, but the grass will sort of grow up through it. And the areas where you drive, the grass won't grow. They'll sort of keep wearing down to gravel. And the areas where you're not driving will over time sort of accrue and become green. So it's a marathon, not a sprint, but that is the best way to do it. All right, good. All right, that's hardscape. Let me move on to talk about structures. So structures are what you guys were starting to bring up, I think quite a bunch of structures, right? Pools, decks, walls, arbors, gazebos, showers, all the good stuff, wood storage, sheds, I don't know. And when we talk about structures, we're starting to now think about vertical materials that you might use in your garden. So stone and bricks make an appearance again. The gabions that I described, I have an image of a garden that uses gabions really beautifully. Again, maybe concrete makes an appearance, wood, I don't know. You could spend all day and like multiple days trawling through every kind of wall that the interwebs has to offer, right? There's stone walls, there's wood walls, there's block walls. And, you know, you can find a dizzying array, an infinite array of inspirations and ideas. But, you know, because of that, again, I think that the best way to start is with functional questions about walls. And then your aesthetics will flow from that, okay? So when I think about walls, these are the series of questions I ask myself, right? Do I even really need it? Do I want it? Maybe that's a good enough reason, but also, you know, can it be done with a slope instead? If I need it or want it, what's its height? What's its overall height, and what's the height going to be above grade? And then what's the amount of it that needs to go below grade to be strong and have structure? Is it retaining? Is it going to hold back soil in a part of your garden? Or is it freestanding, creating a separation between two different conditions? Do you need to worry about drainage? Is a lot of water coming down behind it that's going to slowly push it over the years? Or are there things you can do, i.e. tons of gravel behind it and some piping to make sure water drains away? Questions about, you know, structural questions like, do you need a big concrete footing or just some crushed stone? Those are ones I encourage you to explore on a small scale, but if it's a larger scale, find a great local craftsman to work with, because they will give you some great advice about that. Last thing I want you to do is invest in a wall that doesn't have, you know, proper support. Is it a wall that, you know, has a core that's maybe even just breeze blocks that you fill with mortar that you can set up, and then you veneer it by mortaring on beautiful beach stones or whatever else? That's a really accessible wall. And then I also think about caps. Caps are so important. Is this a wall that someone's going to want to sit on? And how comfortable does it have to be? How long do they have to sit there? So does this cap need to be flat? Does it need to be non-slip? Does it want to have a little overhang that I could fit some lights under? Things like that. Again, same questions again, right? We're going to ask those questions. What's its function? What's the aesthetic I'm going after? And then you evaluate on cost. But let's look at some inspirational walls. So this, anyone been here? Anyone know where this is? It is
Swarthmore Amphitheater.
Swarthmore Amphitheater, that's correct. And it's incredibly ordered and precise, these walls, right? Look at them. And really neat detail, right? The trees they've chosen here, these are all liriodendrons. They're all tulip trees, which are incredibly tall and incredibly straight. So the combination of these really precise ordered walls and these very tall trees, it's an outdoor cathedral, right? These are the columns of the cathedral, and these are the space, and it really raises the experience of being in it, those choices about materials and plants. But if you look closer at the walls, they're fabulous. They're the materials that express it are really local. They relied on a very regional thin shale fieldstone that they've just mortared into place and mortared the top of to create something flat. You know, it creates textures and opportunities for moss to grow and the ability to express time, and a nod to regional context. Yet I also think it's a inside joke, designer joke. It's sort of a humor that this cathedral comes down to earth, literally, just with some local stone. Oops, sorry. Next, This should be familiar to you guys. Another amphitheater, Fletcher Steele's amphitheater just next door here. So contrast the Swarthmore Amphitheater with this one, right? And look at the different types of stone used and the manner that they've used the stone, right? So this stone that you guys have here, big rocks, big blocks. They're not square. They all have their unique character. They've been sort of organized so the flattest sides line up, so you get this feeling of walls, but really they're allowed to be sort of wild and rocky and do their thing. The function stays the same, right? People are allowed to sit on them and use them in all the same ways. But what he's doing is, first of all, he used regionally available materials, but it's also a reference to the place where it's in. The Swarthmore Amphitheater is interior facing, right? It's all about people coming together. It's a Quaker school. It's about Quaker meeting. It was about looking internally to your community. This amphitheater is set by the ocean. You're looking out. You're looking at the reference of the point further out and the rocks out there. So it's referring to a very different place and use and language. And I think it's majestically wild. All right. Courier Farm in Danby, Vermont. This is home of Dan Kiley, another wonderful designer. And this is his home and is often considered his masterwork. And what I love about this view is it shows the intersection of three different types of structures, right? An old farm wall that was pre-existing. Actually, it could be four structures because I think the orchard is another structure, right? These soft inset stepstones that also have been there so long that they're sort of sunk into the site. I love that. That's such a great feeling. And then in order to, move across these, he hasn't tried to use, let me fake in some ye olde steps. He said, no, I'm going to use these big floating concrete slabs so that they don't actually touch these walls. They let you move across them and appreciate them again in contrast, right? I think by not forcing them to be all matchy-matchy, he's drawn a really beautiful tension between modern and traditional aesthetics. Also, sometimes there's just beautiful steps to think about. This is Dan Snow's work. If you know any of his dry stone walling work, it's just outrageous. And then this is that gabion wall I wanted to show you. So this is a project out in Michigan. It's really sweet. It was a new farmhouse, but the people wanted to evoke sort of some of the traditions and shapes, traditional shapes. So they wanted these, old garden walls, but they did it in a new material, right? So these are gabions. You can see they're stacked stone cages filled with stone. I think I even read somewhere this was stone that, came out of blasting for the site and they just crushed it up and used it on site. So great principle to reuse it. You're not hauling anything away or bringing it in. And then they just poured some concrete tops to it. They're beautiful to move through, I'm sure, in the summer, but I love these winter pictures where you really see the contrast of the snow and the texture of the stone. All right, other structures in landscape, fences. I think you know my drill by now, right? They come in all shapes and sizes and materials. There's historic ones, cleaner, more contemporary ones, I guess. Metal ones, kind of ugly ones. Functionally, it really, a lot depends on what they're trying to do. Are they about creating privacy? Are they about delineating public space from private space? Are they meant to contain pets and kids? Are they there to dress up the landscape and be a beautiful backdrop? Those are lots of questions you can ask yourself before you choose something. And so before you go and just, choose the vinyl one from Home Depot because it's there, I want you to look at some other inspirations. I've brought you back. This is that Allegheny Riverfront Park in Pittsburgh. And they have two custom fence elements in this that I love that look really sort of big and urban, but they're accessible. They hand did them, but they've just created panels around really simple metal mesh that you can get. And on the left, what you're seeing is they doubled those mesh panels and then they've grown plants up between them. And so this becomes a thick living green wall between the highway that's above and these ramps that get you down to the river walk below. So it's sound and color, mostly there in the summer when I think you're spending more time. But even in the winter, it's really interesting. You can see them in the corner over here, still with all the growth on it. And the other element I wanted to draw your attention to is this over here, and I'll go back up. This is another really interesting fence element. Again, they use the simple panels, but this was a collaboration with the artist Anne Hamilton. And she took this form of sort of a found piece of driftwood, and she abstracted it and turned it into this beautiful, sinuous piece of bronze that you can imagine walking on it. It's like every toddler parent's worst nightmare because you just want to touch it the whole way down. Like you just want to run your hand all the way. And it's beautiful. And so that's, maybe you're not going to cast your own bronze handrail, but you could find some gorgeous pieces of driftwood or an oiled piece of a cedar tree that's come down, right? Something that can add character and really sensory moment to a standard fence. You can dress it up that way. And then I just want you to spend a minute marinating and soak in this piece of art. This is another McYoung Kim project. I just love her stuff. It's spectacular. And in this case, the fence is art, but it also makes art of the garden. Love it. I'll also show you this one, right? This is a type of fence I'm sure lots of people have seen. It's pretty common. You put in a post, you weave your boards through it. It's a great way to do that. This is a design garden, the Crackle Garden by Landwork Studio, I think. Landworks. But look at the attention to the materials and the spacing. Because what they were thinking about in this is not just the fence, but the shadows that it makes and where it's going to be in the garden and what sort of shadows it casts at different times of year and over what other materials, things like that. An even simpler example, this is just in Portland. I walk past this every day. This is Soren Nord did this project. It's just some condos. And he took the world's simplest fence, right? Just these big metal uprights. And he sistered up some, wood strapping almost, and then these boards. But he's used these really standard boards in different ways depending on the need. So here it is. There's something sort of nice behind it, but you don't want to see it. There's enough, spacing that it doesn't feel claustrophobic. You can sort of see air is coming through, but you're not looking right at it. Then when the fence goes in front of someone's living space where they do want privacy, those boards get really tight and they don't allow views through, especially from below. But now we're leaving the top section empty and he's stringing just wires across so that people can grow things and get some green height. So in the summer, when you might be spending time out there, the wall gets even taller. Here's an example. This side actually looks on to an uglier parking lot. So the boards are tighter at the bottom, but they still let air through at the top. It's just a great little way to think of really simple materials, but the way you choose to consciously use them changes everything. Structures, gazebos, pergolas, right? They're great. You can get them in a kit from almost anywhere. You can work with a local builder. They're lovely. But, one thing I note is it's really easy to think about these sort of structures as just objects in the garden, right? Whether it's this or it's even a sort of fancier version, right? It's an object, it's a moment. As opposed to, this is the pergola at Wave Hill in Riverdale, New York, right? And so what this pergola is doing is it's using these really strong pillars that are taking all of the weight and structure so that it can have really thin members across the top, and it's framing this incredible view. The pergola is not about the pergola, it's about framing this view. And it's about reinforcing these amazing long horizontals, right? The palisades across the way, the river that you're looking across. The pergola is furthering the big idea about settling into this space. Similarly, anyone been to the Polly Hill Arboretum on Martha's Vineyard? Oh, it's so fun. This is the pergola at their visitor center. And I love it because again, it's so integrated both with the place and with their ideals as an arboretum, right? They're using these salvaged wood posts, and then they're using limbs that come out of their own pruning in the arboretum, and then cables that they can grow vines up so that, this becomes, you're within the green, you're within the trees. And the posts, they land inside the terrace. The terrace continues. It's not that the terrace is contained by the post. There's a terrace and this has a moment in it and you're able to sort of step and flow through, that I think is really lovely. I am going to wrap up my chat with maybe the least exciting, but I think it's still important, amenities. What do we mean by amenities as a hardscape tool? This is all the stuff you can move around. Furnishings, I guess lighting is not as movable, but art, fire, you need a foot wash, dog wash, whatever it is, a bib, a hose. These are those sorts of things. And just remember that they too can express and reinforce the idea of your garden. So I want you to look at, I have examples of fire pits and then fire bowls because it's Maine. This is what everybody wants. So we'll start with this one. This is one you can get at Lowe's or Home Depot. It's a kit. You get it and you can set it up and it does the job. Here's sort of the next progression. Someone's worked with a mason and they've created something that, it's still the pit in the center, but they've created this beautiful stone seat wall. I would argue though that like you're still separated, right? Like it's the garden is over there and your fire pit is over here. This fire pit, I don't know, did Todd show this one? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I worked on this when I was with his office years ago and it was fabulous. I don't know if you told the story behind it, but this was a family who had come. They came up here and camped as a family on this piece of ledge for years before they built a house up here. And they had memories with their kids of building fires out on this ledge. But now that there was sort of a real house, they wanted something that expressed something more. So we worked with freshwater stone and created these beautiful surrounds that key into the ledge and then set these big flat pavers. And it's a magical place. That same thing with fire bowls, right? You can get this or a solo stove almost anywhere. You could take it to the next level with something that really is like artistic and fun and expresses your personality. Or this is a project of mine that I love. Again, it's back to actually a very simple bowl, but we've sunk it into the site. So it's not the object in the middle. It's now at a height that people, as they're sitting around it, look over. So you look at, you're looking at your friends more. The fire is below you. When the bowl is up, the fire is like in between your face and their face. It gets a little creepy, spooky, I should say. But we've pushed it down, and so it's really expressing that it's of this place. Right. There you go. Well, that's it for me of the pretty pictures. I just want to vault you to, I hope after today you feel empowered to go out there and experiment with hardscape. And as you do, and you think about, what structure and style you want to express, you're going to think about what happens where and why you need these things, how do people move around, what's the material palette and style. But I also want to say, don't forget the magic. What's the magical thing that you're going to make happen with this element? And then when can we all come visit you? Good. Thank you guys.